Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, January 14, 2025. President-elect Donald Trump's Defense Secretary nominee, Pete Hegseth, testifies before the Senate Armed Services Committee that he would bring a warrior culture to the Pentagon. And concerning his never leading an organization so large, he said it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm, a change agent. Senators questioned him about his credentials, plus his past statements opposing women in combat, and allegations of misconduct, including sexual assault and excessive drinking. House Speaker Mike Johnson says there should be conditions on any federal aid money sent to help victims of the catastrophic Los Angeles wildfires. The House passes a bill to prohibit transgender girls and women from competing in women's sports from elementary school through college. Congressman Jamie Raskin, former member of the January 6th committee, reacts to the release of Special Counsel Jack Smith's report, concluding there was sufficient evidence to convict Donald Trump of trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken talks about reports that a ceasefire and hostage release agreement between Israel and Hamas is close to being finalized. USA Today writes Pete Hegseth emerged mostly unscathed by withering questioning during his confirmation hearing at the Senate Armed Services Committee Tuesday, as Democratic senators laid into him over comments about women in the military and raised allegations of serious impropriety. Hegseth, Donald Trump's pick for defense secretary, kicked off a marathon run of Senate confirmation hearings, the first public questioning of the president-elect's top administration choices. The Hegseth hearing was Tuesday's main and only event. The former Fox and Friends co-host dodged and demurred when confronted over an 8-year-old rape complaint that resulted in no charges and allegations of mismanagement and drinking on the job, and said he was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, Armed Services Committee chair, said he was encouraged by the hearing. He said, "I think he helped himself immensely." That was reporting from USA Today. Here's part of Pete Hegseth's opening statement to the Senate Armed Services Committee.
Now, it is true and has been acknowledged that I don't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years. But as President Trump also told me, we've repeatedly placed people atop the Pentagon with supposedly the right credentials, whether they are retired generals, academics, or defense contractor executives. And where has it gotten us? He believes, and I humbly agree, that it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. A change agent, someone with no vested interest in certain companies or specific programs or approved narratives. My only special interest is the warfighter. Deterring wars, and if called upon, winning wars by ensuring our warriors never enter a fair fight. We let them win, and we bring them home. Like many of my generation, I've been there. I've led troops in combat. I've been on patrol for days. I've pulled a trigger downrange, heard bullets whiz by, flex-cuffed insurgents, called in close air support, led medevacs, dodged IEDs, pulled out dead bodies, and knelt before a battlefield cross. This is not academic for me. This is my life. I led then, and I will lead now. Ask anyone who's ever worked for me or with me. I know what I don't know. My success as a leader, and I very much look forward to discussing my organization's successes at Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done. But my success as a leader has always been setting a clear vision, hiring people smarter and more capable than me, empowering them to succeed, holding everyone accountable, and driving toward clear metrics. Build the plan, work the plan, and then work harder than everyone else around you. I've sworn an oath to the Constitution before, and if confirmed, I will proudly do it again. This time, for the most important deployment of my life.
Pete Hegseth, President-elect Trump's defense secretary nominee, part of his opening statement at today's Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Before the hearing began, Donald Trump posted online, "Pete Hegseth will make a great Secretary of Defense. He has my complete and total support. Good luck today, Pete." The committee chair, Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, expressed support for the nominee.
Admittedly, this nomination is unconventional. The nominee is unconventional. Just like that New York developer who rode down the escalator in 2015 to announce his candidacy for president. That may be what makes Mr. Hegseth an excellent choice to improve this unacceptable status quo that I just described. He is a decorated post-9/11 combat veteran. He will inject a new warrior ethos into the Pentagon, a spirit that can cascade from the top down. Mr. Hegseth will bring energy and fresh ideas to shake up the bureaucracy. He will focus relentlessly on the warfighter and the military's core missions, deterring wars and winning the ones we must fight. He will bring a swift end to corrosive distractions such as DEI. Today, many simply acknowledge and live with the systemic problems I have mentioned earlier in acquisition, accountability, technology transition, and organizational civil service reform. Mr. Hegseth will actually move to fix these issues decisively. In short, I'm confident that Mr. Hegseth, supported by a team of experienced top officials, will get the job done.
Senator Roger Wicker, Armed Services Committee Chair. The committee ranking Democrat Jack Reed of Rhode Island praised Pete Hegseth for his military service, but said he is not qualified to be Defense Secretary.
You have been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary is responsible for leading a department of 3.5 million service members and civilians, an annual budget of nearly $900 billion, and hundreds of thousands of aircraft, ships, submarines, combat vehicles, satellites, and the nuclear arsenal. The Secretary also plays a powerful role with our allies, partners, and adversaries abroad. And as we speak, China is seeking to undermine our interests, intimidate our friends, and challenge our standing in the world. Russia's campaign against Ukraine threatens not only Europe, but the entire global order. Ongoing violence in the Middle East has teetered on the edge of all-out war, and the ideologies and actions of violent extremists endanger our citizens, even on our own soil, as the recent tragedy in New Orleans painfully reminds us. These are perilous times, and the position of Secretary of Defense demands a leader of unparalleled experience, wisdom, and above all else, character. The Secretary is expected to be a fair, nonpartisan, and responsible leader, as well as a trustworthy advocate for the men and women that he leads. Mr. Hegseth, I do not believe that you are qualified to meet the overwhelming demands of this job. We must acknowledge the concerning public reports against you. A variety of sources, including your own writings, implicate you with disregarding the laws of war, financial mismanagement, racist and sexist remarks about men and women in uniform, alcohol abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and other troubling issues. I have reviewed many of these allegations and find them extremely alarming. Indeed, the totality of your own writings and alleged conduct would disqualify any service member from holding any leadership position in the military, much less being confirmed as the Secretary of Defense.
Senator Jack Reed, Armed Services Committee ranking Democrat. From an NBC News article, Pete Hegseth was introduced at the hearing by Congressman Mike Waltz, Republican of Florida, Trump's incoming national security advisor, who praised Hegseth's experience as a soldier who would be the first Pentagon leader to have served as a junior officer on the front lines of combat. Tapped to lead the massive Defense Department, Hegseth has faced allegations of sexual assault, excessive drinking, and financial mismanagement when he ran a veterans advocacy organization, all of which he has denied. He has faced criticism for past opposition to allowing women and openly gay people to serve in combat, positions he has walked back. When Senator Roger Wicker mentioned the accusations against him, Hegseth dismissed them as a coordinated smear campaign in the left-wing media. Also, one more paragraph from the NBC News article. The FBI background check on Hegseth, which the chairman and the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee received late last week, does not include interviews with the woman or with Hegseth's ex-wives, according to 3 sources with direct knowledge of the content of the report. Here are some of the questions at today's hearing from Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat from Hawaii.
Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement relating to this kind of conduct?
Senator, I was falsely accused in October of 2017. It was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared.
I don't think completely cleared is accurate, but the fact is that your own lawyer said that you entered into an NDA and paid a person who accused you of raping her a sum of money to make sure that she did not file a complaint. Moving on. As Secretary, you will be in charge of maintaining good order and discipline by enforcing the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ. In addition to the sexual assault allegations, and by the way, the answer to my second question should have been yes. I have read multiple reports of your regularly being drunk at work, including by people who worked with you at Fox News. Do you know that being drunk at work is prohibited for service members under the UCMJ?
Senator, those
Yes
are
or no?
multiple false anonymous reports peddled by NBC
Do you
News
know that
run directly
drinking on the job
contradictory to
is
the dozens of men and women at
not
Fox News
contemplated
Channel
I'm
who
not
I work
hearing-
with
I'm
who
not
came
hearing
on
the
the
answer to my
record
question.
and said they've
In your
never
opening
seen
statement,
that.
Mr. Hegseth, you commit to holding leaders accountable at all levels. That includes you, of course. And frankly, as Secretary, you will be on the job 24/7. You recently promised some of my Republican colleagues that you stopped drinking and won't drink if confirmed, correct?
Absolutely.
Will you resign as Secretary of Defense if you drink on the job, which is a 24/7 position?
I've made this commitment on behalf of the
Will you
men and women I'm
resign as
serving.
Secretary of Defense
I've
if
made this
you
commitment
drink
on
on the
behalf of
job?
the men and women I'm serving
I'm not
because it's the
hearing-
most important deployment
I'm not
of my
hearing an
life.
answer to my question, so I'm going to move on. While you have made that commitment, you will not commit to resigning if you drink on the job.
Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat from Hawaii, questioning Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary nominee in the incoming Trump administration at today's Armed Services Committee hearing. From the Des Moines Register, Senator Joni Ernst pressed Pete Hegseth about women's roles in the military and thanked him for their frank discussions as he sat before an often contentious hearing in his nomination to lead the U.S. Department of Defense Tuesday. Ernst has been seen as a key hurdle to Hegseth's confirmation, and although she approached her questions firmly, it was without confrontation. Instead, she appeared to emphasize common ground with Hegseth, as the pair agreed that women seeking to serve in combat roles should meet the same high standards as men. That was from the Des Moines Register. Here's the exchange between Senator Ernst and Pete Hegseth.
I had the privilege of serving in uniform for over 23 years between our Army Reserves and our Iowa Army National Guard. Did serve in Kuwait and missions in Iraq. And so it is incredibly important that I stress, and I hope that if confirmed, you continue to stress, that every man and woman has opportunity to serve their country in uniform and do so at any level as long as they are meeting the standards that are set forward. And we talked about that in my office. I do believe in high standards. Now, I was denied the opportunity to serve in any combat role because I have a lot of gray hair. And the policy has changed since then, okay? So I've been around for quite a while. But for the young women that are out there now and can meet those standards, and again, I'll emphasize they should be very, very high standards. They must physically be able to achieve those standards so that they can complete their mission. But I want to know, again, let's make it very clear for everyone here today. As Secretary of Defense, will you support women continuing to have the opportunity to serve in combat roles?
Senator, first of all, thank you for your service, as we discussed extensively as well.
It's my privilege.
And my answer is yes, exactly the way that you caveated it. Yes, women will have access to ground combat roles, given the standards remain high, and we'll have a review to ensure the standards have not been eroded in any one of these cases. That'll be part of one of the first things we do at the Pentagon is reviewing that in a gender-neutral way, the standards, ensuring readiness and meritocracy is front and center. But absolutely, it would be the privilege of a lifetime to, if confirmed, to be the Secretary of Defense for all men and women in uniform who fight so heroic. They have so many other options. They decide to put their right hand up for our country, and it would be an honor to have a chance to lead them.
Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary nominee, questioned by Senator Joni Ernst, Republican of Iowa. More from the Des Moines Register article. Ernst also secured public commitments from Hegseth that he would ensure the Pentagon passes an audit by 2028 and that he would appoint a senior-level official dedicated to sexual assault prevention and response within the military. Although Ernst has said she would support Pete through this process, she is one of the few Republican senators who has not publicly promised to vote for Hegseth. And with a slim GOP majority in the Senate, just a few Republican holdouts could derail his nomination. Ernst's office did not immediately return a request for comment about how she will vote on Hegseth's nomination following the hearing, reporting from Des Moines Register. More from the hearing, Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, asking the nominee about military readiness and diversity.
I've served on this committee for 6 years, 2 years under President Trump and the past 4 under President Joe Biden. I've seen how the Biden-Harris administration pushed the DoD to prioritize wokeness over being the most lethal military force in the world. It's our readiness, our national security, and our ability to recruit people who are willing to put their lives on the line for our country. Can you talk about some of the changes we can make to improve recruitment and rebuild our military into the most lethal force in the world?
First of all, Senator, thank you for the question. Thank you for your time. I think the first and most important thing we could have done is elect Donald Trump as the new commander-in-chief, because past his prologue, our warfighters understand what kind of commander-in-chief they're going to get in President Donald Trump, someone who stands behind them, someone who gives them clear missions, someone who ends wars decisively, and the issue of Ukraine was mentioned, and ensures new wars are not started. There was a minor incursion under Barack Obama into Crimea, followed by nothing under President Trump, followed by an all-out assault by Vladimir Putin into Ukraine under the Biden administration. That did not happen under Donald Trump. Donald Trump managed the Taliban. Under the Biden administration, Afghanistan collapsed tragically, ending in the lives of 13 at Abbey Gate, who we remember every single day, and no one was held accountable for that. Chinese spy balloons were flying over the country. None of that happened under Donald Trump, and our warfighters understand that. So there's no better recruiter, in my mind, for our military than President Donald Trump. My job is to come alongside him, should I be confirmed, and continue to emphasize his emphasis on warfighting, on getting anything that doesn't contribute to meritocracy out of how decisions are made inside the Pentagon. What gender you are, what race you are, your views on climate change, or whether you are a person of conscience and your faith should have no bearing on whether you get promoted or whether you're selected to go to West Point or whether you graduate from Ranger School. The only thing that should matter is how capable are you at your job? How excellent are you at your job? I served in multi-ethnic units in every place that I worked, every place that I served. None of that mattered. But suddenly we re-inject DEI and critical race theory, dividing troops into different categories, oppressor and oppressed, in ways that they otherwise just want to work together. That's why I've pointed out before, and I'll say it again, and because I'm sure it'll be quoted to me at some point. The dumbest phrase in military history is our unity is our strength. No, our shared purpose is our strength. Our shared mission is our strength. We are one DoD community of all committed to the same mission. Has nothing to do with your background. Has to do with what your commitment is to the country.
Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary nominee for the incoming Donald Trump administration, questioned by Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, at today's Armed Services Committee hearing. The hearing ran a little over 4 hours. We covered it live on the C-SPAN networks. You can find the video in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. After the hearing, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, said the FBI report on Pete Hegseth should be made available to all senators on the committee.
If today's hearing is a sense of what's to come, we are deeply concerned. It's no secret Mr. Hegseth has some incredibly troubling allegations against him. He is, by all accounts, woefully unfit to be Secretary of Defense. So much so that my colleague, Senator Reid, requested to allow all committee members to review all FBI background documents. Chairman Wicker said no. What's he afraid of? What are they afraid of? If Mr. Hegseth had nothing to hide, and if Republicans do indeed think he's qualified and ready for one of the most consequential jobs in the country, why is the chairman hell-bent to keep all relevant information out of the hands of his colleagues? To dismiss the allegations against Mr. Hegseth, but then reject full transparency is at best odd, suspicious, concerning at worst. Unfortunately, Mr. Hegseth's testimony failed to address the disturbing questions that plague his nomination. So, it appears that Mr. Hegseth's strategy is to follow the 5 Ds of dodgeball: dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer at a news conference. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, at a separate news conference was asked about his plans for the Pete Hegseth nomination.
You have not said much about Pete Hegseth, but now that he's at this hearing, do you have any concerns about these allegations from his past, the sexual assault allegation? And if not, how quickly do you plan to move his nomination to the floor?
I think he's addressed those allegations, and I didn't see all of it. I saw pieces of it, but every report I've had, the readout from the hearing this morning is that he acquitted himself extremely well and made a strong argument for why he ought to be the next Secretary of Defense. If he's reported out of the committee, we will work quickly to get him across the floor, obviously, because that is a key, critical, important national security position that needs to be filled.
The Senate Majority Leader John Thune at a news conference. New York Times writes the Armed Services Committee is expected to vote Monday to advance Hegseth's bid to the Senate floor after he is formally nominated by President Trump. Hegseth will then need the backing of at least 50 of the 53 Republicans on the Senate floor, given that Democrats and the chamber's 2 independents are expected to oppose his confirmation. If he can secure at least 50 votes, Vice President J.D. Vance can cast a tie-breaking vote to confirm him. That was from the New York Times. President-elect Trump's nominee for Homeland Security Secretary, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, will have a confirmation hearing this week before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, originally scheduled for Wednesday, now delayed to Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Governor Noem gave her State of the State address today in Pierre and spoke about the nomination.
You probably know that President-elect Trump and President Trump have called on me to serve, if confirmed, as the next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. It's a tremendous honor and a great responsibility. The mission of the Department of Homeland Security is to keep the American people safe from the threats to the homeland. Now, the situation at our southern border is nothing short of an invasion. And over the last 4 years, America's border security has been purposely weakened and ignored. Our laws have not been enforced, and this has led to millions and millions of law enforcement encounters with illegal aliens. That doesn't include the millions of gotaways that we're aware of. And it doesn't include the ridiculous number who got in through the CBP One app. And it doesn't include the many thousands who caught a free plane ride into our country courtesy of the federal government. Now, too many of these individuals disappear while they wait for an asylum hearing before ever showing up for a hearing, sometimes years later. As you know, I've taken a stand against this invasion. We've deployed our South Dakota National Guard to our southern border 8 times, and that includes 5 state deployments to support Texas's work to stop the flow of illegal aliens. I went to the border myself several times, and I saw the illegal immigrants infiltrating our country. I saw our National Guard troops enforcing our laws and building a wall. Ladies and gentlemen, leadership has consequences. And we see the consequences of Washington's indecision right here in South Dakota. We've seen activity from cartels and their affiliates in some of our poorest communities, and our states around the rest of the country see it as well. Increased crime, increased drugs, overdose deaths, violence, rape, human trafficking, and murder. Even known terrorists have crossed our border amongst the illegals, and they could be anywhere. The invasion is an existential threat to America, and it threatens our national security and our economy. So the basic question is this: what kind of country do we want to leave to our families? I want to leave them a state and a nation that's even safer and stronger and freer than the one that I grew up in.
Governor Kristi Noem, Republican from South Dakota, giving her State of the State address today in the capital city Pier. She has been nominated for Homeland Security Secretary in the Trump administration, and she has a hearing before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee scheduled now for Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. This is Washington Today. LA Times writes, with President-elect Donald Trump about to take office, federal aid to fire-ravaged Los Angeles has already become entangled in a partisan political fight in Washington. The disastrous wildfires are some of the most destructive and expensive in American history, underscoring the need for sustained funding for continued recovery efforts. But House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, indicated Tuesday that Congress could be setting up a potentially long political battle for continued relief funding based on California's liberal leadership during the disaster. That was from the LA Times. Speaker Johnson spoke in Washington at a news conference.
We're watching with heartache the people in the Los Angeles area and Southern California who are just devastated by this disaster. The leader and I come from a disaster-prone state, Louisiana. We deal with hurricanes and floods and tornadoes all the time, and wildfires as well. We all know that. We all feel that. We're all Americans. And the Americans there that are affected, desperately need and deserve help. But you've also heard us talk about our concerns with the governance of the state of California, state and local. And to the extent that there is complicity involved in the scope of the disaster, then we think that's something that needs to be carefully regarded. You've heard the word conditions on aid. We're not projecting in advance what this will be. First of all, you have to understand the fires are still raging, and no one knows what the ultimate cost will be. It takes some time to make estimates and all of that, and that deliberative process will go forward. And the way it works, as you know, is the administration will submit a request, a disaster supplemental request, to Congress. That goes through the Office of Management and Budget. This is a long, deliberative process that we've gone through many times. So it's premature right now for anybody to say what that number will be or what the scope of that supplemental legislation would entail. I'm told, and I heard this morning as well, I spoke to President Trump about 90 minutes ago. I think he's planning to go make a trip himself to Southern California to see the disaster himself, and we will follow the administration's lead on this. But I will say that we have to make sure there are safeguards on the precious treasure of the American people. There are natural disasters, of course, but if they are made much worse by human error and deliberate policy choices that were unwise and were stated as such at the time, then I think that that's something that that needs to be carefully regarded.
House Speaker Mike Johnson at a news conference today in Washington. Article from The Hill, Speaker Johnson also confirmed that he's having talks among Republicans about the possibility of tying emergency aid to a debt ceiling hike, and he voiced support for offsetting the cost of any new disaster funding with changes elsewhere in the budget. His comments have sparked an outcry from Democrats in California and beyond, who are quick to point out that Democrats demanded neither offsets nor partisan conditions on aid to red states in the wake of similar natural disasters, including recent hurricanes that battered Florida and the Carolinas last year. That was from the article in The Hill. The House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar from California took a question about this at a separate news conference.
What specific conditions have Republicans asked for you? And would you ever consider asking for conditions the next time there's a disaster in Florida or Texas or Louisiana?
Obviously, I mean, we have a pretty robust track record when it comes to disaster assistance and emergency supplementals, the terms we throw around here when it comes to disasters, whether it was Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane, Sandy. In years past, Democrats, even when we had united control, never asked red states or Republicans for anything. We prioritized helping people. We prioritized funding the disaster relief fund so people could get the assistance that they need. We prioritized community development block grant funding for disaster recovery that was specific to those who have gone through events like this, whether that was Louisiana or Hawaii and Maui or New York or the Carolinas. It would never cross our mind to add conditions. And that's why it's unconscionable that Speaker Johnson would raise this issue. But let's separate this, because what Speaker Johnson is doing, he does not have the votes to raise the debt limit. So he is trying to do everything he can so Donald Trump can have a victory, so billionaires and the largest corporations can continue to enjoy tax treatment that they want, to the tune of a couple $1 trillion. In order to do that, they have to raise the debt limit. He does not have the votes for that. And so that's why he is joining these two. And we expect them to talk about a lot of issues that they could address if the debt limit was raised. The important piece, as the vice chair noted, these disasters don't have red and blue ties on it when they come into our communities. We just need to provide the aid and the assistance so people can recover and get back to some sense of normalcy.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, the House Democratic Caucus chair at a news conference with other House Democrats. Associated Press writes that some 40,000 people have already applied for assistance from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which has provided over $8 million so far for immediate needs, said Robert J. Fenton, Jr., Regional Administrator for FEMA Region 9. But Fenton said at a news conference on Tuesday that everyone will need to file insurance claims. FEMA aid is designed to help with unmet needs after insurance claims are paid. Fenton said the maximum amount of aid FEMA can provide is $43,600. The AP article also says President Joe Biden has said the federal government would pay 100% of the firefighting and recovery costs in the first 180 days, but Fenton noted that doesn't mean FEMA will cover 100% of individual family costs. Wall Street today, the Dow up 221, NASDAQ down 43, S&P up 6. Washington today continues in a moment.
Witness Democracy Unfiltered with C-SPAN. Experience history as it unfolds with C-SPAN's live coverage this month as Republicans take control of both chambers of Congress, and a new chapter begins with the swearing in of the 47th President of the United States on Monday, January 20th. Tune in for our live all-day coverage of the presidential inauguration as Donald Trump takes the oath of office, becoming President of the United States. Stay with C-SPAN this month for comprehensive, live, unfiltered coverage of the 119th Congress and the presidential inauguration. C-SPAN. Democracy Unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. This from AP. President Joe Biden on Tuesday signed an ambitious executive order on artificial intelligence that seeks to ensure the infrastructure needed for advanced AI operations, such as large-scale data centers and new clean power facilities, can be built quickly and at scale in the United States. And from the Hill, Speaker Mike Johnson has selected Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, Republican of North Carolina, to serve as chair of the House Rules Committee, installing the veteran lawmaker at the helm of the panel that will play a key role in legislating throughout the 119th Congress. Johnson selected Foxx to lead the committee over Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, whom many hardline conservatives were pushing for, and Michelle Fischbach, Republican of Minnesota, and Pete Sessions, Republican of Texas, who also expressed interest in the role. Foxx will be the only female committee chair in the 119th Congress. That was from The Hill. The House on Tuesday passed a Republican measure banning transgender girls and women from competing on school sports teams that match their gender identity after the party leaned into the issue during the 2024 campaign. That was the first line from a CBS News article. It goes on, the bill known as the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act would amend Title IX, the federal law banning sex discrimination in schools, to recognize a person's sex as based solely on a person's reproductive biology and genetics at birth. Schools who allow a person whose sex is male to participate in an athletic program or activity that is designated for women or girls risk losing federal funding. Reporting from CBS News. Here's some of the floor debate before that vote. Congressman Greg Steube, Republican of Florida, sponsored the bill.
In giving homage to the trans movement, radical leftists have given way to the corruption of the minds of our nation's youth by dismantling the very protections that Congress created to ensure fairness in education and athletics. In 1972, Congress created Title IX to protect women's sports and to give women their own playing field in athletics. In worship to their trans idols, radical leftists want to kill Title IX, abandoning women across the country. Parents don't want biological men in locker rooms with their daughters, nor do they believe it's fair that a male can compete with women in female athletics. This is why Title IX protections were implemented in the first place. Radical leftists want you to believe that this is never happening, or it's so rare we shouldn't be concerned. The other side just made a comment about so few of these people are involved in college athletics. The truth of the matter proves otherwise. In my very own district, my constituent, Emma Wyant, an incredibly talented swimmer and Olympic medalist, lost a 2022 NCAA Women's Swimming Championship title for the 500-meter freestyle by less than 2 seconds. The man who beat her formerly competed for years on the men's swimming team and took home that title after identifying as a woman. It's a sad day in our country when radical leftists are willing to erase the rights that women have fought decades to obtain, all to elevate biological males to the top of women's platforms.
Congressman Greg Steube, Republican from Florida, on the House floor. Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, Democrat of Oregon, spoke against the bill.
Keep in mind, colleagues, that as of last month, of the approximately 510,000 athletes who play at the NCAA level, 10 are transgender. Not 10,000, 10 out of 510,000. Transgender students, like all students, they deserve the same opportunity as their peers to learn teamwork, to find belonging, and to grow into well-rounded adults through sports. Childhood and adolescence, they are important times for growth and development, and sports help students form healthy habits and develop strong social and emotional skills. Sports provide meaningful opportunities for kids to feel confident in themselves and learn valuable life lessons about teamwork, leadership, and communication. Teams provide a place for kids to make friends and build relationships. Yet my colleagues across the aisle want to take these opportunities away from certain children. That's discriminatory and it's wrong. And my colleagues are apparently so afraid of people who are different from them that they've manufactured false and dangerous presumptions based on outdated stereotypes about transgender people, especially transgender women and girls. Additionally, there is no way this so-called protection bill could be enforced without opening the door to harassment and privacy violations. It opens the door to inspection, not protection, of women and girls in sports. Will students have to undergo exams to prove they're a girl? We're already seeing examples of harassment and questioning of girls who may not conform to stereotypical feminine roles. Will they be subject to demands for medical tests, private information? That's intrusive, offensive, and unacceptable, especially from a party of limited government.
Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, Democrat from Oregon, on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 218 to 206, with one member voting present. 2 Democrats joined all Republicans in supporting the bill, Henry Cuellar of Texas and Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, and the one present vote was Don Davis, Democrat from North Carolina. The bill now heads to the Senate. President-elect Donald Trump responding to the overnight release of special counsel Jack Smith's report in the investigation into his efforts to overturn his loss in the 2020 presidential election, including the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol during the counting of the Electoral College votes. The report reads, "The through line of all of Mr. Trump's criminal efforts was deceit, knowingly false claims of election fraud, and the evidence shows that Mr. Trump used these lies as a weapon to defeat a federal government function foundational to the United States democratic process, and but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial." That was from Jack Smith's report. Donald Trump writing on Truth Social that he was totally innocent and the voters have spoken, and calling Jack Smith a lame-brained prosecutor who was unable to get his case tried before the election. Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, who was a member of the January 6th Investigative Committee, was asked today about the fact that this case never went to trial.
Obviously, the Smith report brings to a conclusion a remarkable and unprecedented prosecutorial endeavor in this country. And your constituent, Attorney General Merrick Garland, obviously has played a very integral role in that project. I want to read a couple of quotes from the last couple of weeks in some of the news coverage concerning the prosecution and its conclusion. Representative Gerald Nadler, who you're obviously taking the place of, recently told Huffington Post, quote, Merrick Garland wasted a year in initiating the investigation and eventual prosecution of Donald Trump. An anonymous Justice Department official involved in the early portion of the investigation recently told CNN, quote, they wasted time, they were not strategic, it was a whole year of nothing. They waited so long, they ended up helping Trump in the primary and dividing the country. What do you think?
But on that time question?
Yeah.
Well, obviously, I mean, looking at it in hindsight, the prosecutors ran out of time. So it seems hard to argue with the proposition that it all should have begun earlier, which isn't to say it necessarily would have won, because they were trying to run out the clock no matter what. And if you're dealing with a completely partisan judge like Eileen Cannon, she would have done anything in her power to make sure that the clock was run out. So who knows what the difference would have been, but undoubtedly, I'm sure a lot of people feel they should have started earlier.
Well, yeah. Well, the D.C. case obviously is pending here in front of a different judge. The classified documents case was handled with Judge Cannon.
Conversation with Congressman Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, the interviewer, Ankush Kadori, Politico magazine columnist. This was part of a Politico event in Washington today, looking at the first 100 days of the Donald Trump administration. About Special Counsel Jack Smith's report, we have it posted on our website. You can read it all at cspan.org. ABC News writes that President-elect Donald Trump is asking a federal appeals court to reconsider overturning a jury's verdict that found he sexually abused writer E. Jean Carroll in the mid-1990s and awarded her $5 million in damages. And from AP, former First Lady Michelle Obama will skip the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump, the second time in 2 weeks that she is not attending a gathering of former U.S. leaders and their spouses. But former Presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton will be there. Laura Bush and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton will join their husbands for the January 20th swearing-in ceremony at the Capitol, representatives said. That was from AP. And this from the New York Times, Stephen K. Bannon has launched a stinging attack on Elon Musk, calling him a truly evil person, in comments that deepen hostilities between two men who have been influential advisors to President-elect Donald J. Trump. Mr. Bannon said of Mr. Trump's inauguration on January 20th in an interview with an Italian newspaper, I will get Elon Musk kicked out by the time he's inaugurated. He won't have a blue pass with full access to the White House. He'll be like everyone else. That was reporting from the New York Times. Steve Bannon was also at the Politico event today and was asked about Elon Musk.
Let's start with some of the headlines that you've been making recently. There's a new voice in President Trump's ear, Elon Musk. You're not happy about it. Is President Trump too close to Musk?
I did, just to be, it's not that I'm not happy about it. I mean, Elon Musk, and I think I'm the first one that really built the narrative. He came in basically in the spring and early summer, and most importantly, he backed our play, which was this was going to be a MAGA plus election, a base plus these dissident moms at the school boards. And people have been trying to moderate President Trump even on the campaign trail. So number one, Elon Musk came in and totally backed kind of the populist, MAGA play. He then wrote $250 million worth of checks to back that play, not to put in TV advertising, which is extraordinary. That's not over a whole cycle, that's in 5 months. And I've said from the beginning, both in the United States, he deserves a place at the table. And in Europe, I've said, and I think Politico's covered it pretty well, is that, he holds the two tactical nuclear weapons of modern politics, which is unlimited cash and a social media platform that's not just ubiquitous, but also he can deem who's heard and who's not heard. And there's not many governments in Europe that are going to withstand that. That being said, in Politico today, the piece by Messerly and Wren, I think lay it out the best. This is a new coalition, much broader than 16. This is the beginning, I think, of a 1932 FDR-type realignment in American politics. And clearly, you're going to have members of that coalition that don't agree on everything. I do fundamentally disagree with some of the basics of the Mark Andreessen, Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel outlook philosophy of life and philosophy of politics. And there's going to be clashes. But I think the political article today is the best at summing it up. President Trump is good, particularly about people arguing, ideas, and the best idea and the best policy wins. So going forward, it's going to be quite intense. I actually think that we're winning this round, and we're winning this round pretty big. He's already backed off the H-1B visas. He's already said they got to be reformed. We say they have to be done away with. I think we'll get Elon there. And as soon as I can turn Elon Musk from a techno-feudalist to a populist nationalist, we'll start making real progress.
Steve Bannon, former chief White House strategist in the first Donald Trump administration, now podcast host, interviewed by Dasha Burns, Politico's White House bureau chief, at today's program, hosted by Politico, looking at the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Steve Bannon is scheduled to stand trial next month on charges he defrauded donors of We Build the Wall, an online fundraising campaign to support a wall along the U.S. southern border. The final U.S. senator who won election in November has taken the oath of office. Jim Justice, Republican of West Virginia, who was West Virginia governor, delayed his swearing in as senator until the new governor was sworn in. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, the Senate President pro tem, administering the oath today.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this oath obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter. So help you God.
I do.
God, congratulations. You bet.
With Senator Jim Justice being sworn in, the Senate is again at 100 members, 53 in the Republican conference, 47 in the Democratic caucus. This is Washington Today. From Voice of America, Qatar said Tuesday that negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and the Gaza Strip were in the final stages, and that the two sides were at the closest point yet to an agreement. Speaking at a weekly briefing, the Qatari foreign minister spokesperson described the ongoing talks as positive and productive, while also cautioning against overexcitement until a deal is announced. Qatar, Egypt, and the United States have led a months-long effort to try to achieve a halt in the fighting, while talks Tuesday in Doha focused on final details of a deal. That was from Voice of America. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke about this today at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C.
Once we assessed that Israel had achieved its main objective in Gaza of ensuring that Hamas was incapable of carrying out another October 7th, President Biden publicly set out his detailed ceasefire plan. We went around the world building support for the proposal. The UN Security Council swiftly adopted a resolution supporting it, with 14 members voting for it, not a single member voting against it. The Arab League, countries in the region and beyond, all affirmed their support. Hamas, the lone holdout, but now thoroughly isolated, finally accepted President Biden's framework. In the time since, we've worked relentlessly with Qatar and Egypt to negotiate the details of the agreement and its implementation. Now, at different moments, different parties have made it hard to finalize an agreement, or events have delayed or derailed its completion. For the past several months, Hamas has played the spoiler. But over the past several weeks, our intensive efforts have brought us to the brink of full and final agreement. On Sunday, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt put forward a final proposal. The ball is now in Hamas's court. If Hamas accepts, the deal is ready to be concluded and implemented. I believe we will get a ceasefire. And whether we get there in the remaining days of our administration or after January 20th, I believe the deal will follow closely the terms of the agreement that President Biden put forward last May and our administration rallied the world behind.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the Atlantic Council in Washington. This was his final foreign policy speech as Secretary of State in the Biden administration. He also laid out a post-war reconstruction and governance plan for Gaza. Associated Press writing about it says the plan envisions the Palestinian Authority inviting international partners to stand up an interim governing authority to run critical services and oversee the territory. Other partners, notably Arab states, would provide forces to ensure security in the short term. That security mission would depend on a pathway to an independent Palestinian state, unifying Gaza and the West Bank, and will be tasked with creating a secure environment for humanitarian and reconstruction efforts while ensuring border security. That from Associated Press. Another AP story, President Joe Biden notified Congress of his intent to lift the U.S. designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, the White House announced, as part of a deal facilitated by the Catholic Church to free political prisoners on the island. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said in a statement, in taking these steps to bolster the ongoing dialogue between the government of Cuba and the Catholic Church, President Biden is also honoring the wisdom and counsel that has been provided to him by many world leaders, especially in Latin America, who have encouraged him to take these actions on how best to advance the human rights of the Cuban people. Reaction today in a posted video from Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar, Republican from Florida.
What does this do? It basically gives more oxygen, economic oxygen to the regime so it can continue repressing more people. The repressive apparatus will be greased. It's embarrassing because Blinken, as you know, in the House Foreign Affairs Committee told me repeatedly that he was not thinking about taking Cuba off the list of terrorist countries. And now he called my office and said that Biden, directly from the White House, he had been directed that he had to take Cuba off the list.
Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar, Republican from Florida, posting that video. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.